The first time Ren Calloway knocked on that door, she wasn't thinking about love. She was thinking about rent, and about an old man who hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales. Ren ran a small catering service out of her kitchen in Millhaven, a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, only a four-way stop everyone rolled through anyway. She was 34, sharp-tongued when she needed to be, and tired in the particular way that comes from doing 3 jobs to keep one house standing. Her catering business was really just her, a used minivan with a dented bumper and a reputation for showing up on time, even in bad weather. She also picked up shifts at the diner on Route 9 when the catering money ran thin, which it often did that autumn. Her younger brother had moved back in with her after losing his warehouse job, and between his half of nothing and her own bills, the math never quite worked out by the end of the month. The job came through her cousin, who cleaned houses on the east side of town, near the properties with actual driveways instead of gravel patches. An elderly man named William Voss needed someone to cook for him 3 times a week. His son paid well, her cousin said, but nobody lasted more than a month. William was difficult. He didn't like strangers in his kitchen, and he'd already run off 2 hired cooks and a home health aide who cried in her car afterward. Ren needed the money, so she didn't ask too many questions. The house sat at the end of a long drive lined with maple trees just starting to turn orange. It wasn't a mansion, not the kind you'd expect from someone rich enough to hire a private cook. It was a plain brick house, slightly too big for one old man, with a porch light that stayed on even during the day, as if someone had forgotten to turn it off years ago, and nobody had the heart to fix it. William answered the door himself, which surprised her. He was thin, sharp-eyed, wearing a cardigan buttoned wrong. "I don't need a babysitter," he said before she'd even introduced herself. "Good," Ren said. "I'm not applying to be one. I cook. That's all." He studied her for a moment, then stepped aside to let her in. The first few weeks were rough. William complained about everything. Too much salt, not enough salt, the way she chopped onions, the sound her sneakers made on his hardwood floors. Once he told her flatly that her chicken tasted like cardboard, and she told him just as flatly that maybe his taste buds had retired along with him. He'd gone quiet at that, and for a second she thought she'd lost the job. Then he laughed, a short surprised bark of a laugh, like he hadn't used that muscle in a while. She learned to let most of his complaints slide off her. She'd dealt with worse customers at the diner during her 20s. But she noticed things too. She noticed he ate more when she stayed and talked while she cooked, and almost nothing when she left food in the fridge with instructions. She noticed the framed photo on the mantel of a woman with William's same sharp eyes, and the dust that had settled on it in a way that suggested nobody touched it, not even to clean. She noticed the second bedroom upstairs, door always shut, and didn't ask about it for a long time. She started staying an extra 20 minutes after each meal, not because she was paid for it, but because he seemed to need someone to sit across from him at that big, empty table. Some days he talked about his late wife, Margaret, about the diner they used to drive an hour to visit every Sunday, because she liked their pie better than any bakery in town. Other days he barely spoke at all, just watched Ren move around his kitchen like her presence alone was enough. That's how she met Julian. He came home unannounced on a Tuesday in October, still in his suit, tie loosened, looking like a man who'd forgotten what his own kitchen smelled like. Ren was standing at the stove with flour on her sleeve, laughing at something William had said, when Julian walked in and stopped in the doorway like he'd entered the wrong house. "Who are you?" he asked, not rudely, just confused. "She's the only cook who hasn't quit on me," William said, before Ren could answer. "Try not to scare her off." Julian ran 3 logistics companies out of a downtown office 2 hours away, and from what Ren gathered over the following weeks, he barely slept. He was polite with her, in the stiff way people are polite when they're used to giving orders rather than making conversation. He didn't smile much. He'd lost his mother 4 years earlier, and somewhere in the grief and the growing businesses, he and his father had stopped knowing how to talk to each other. He visited on weekends now, sometimes only for a few hours, always looking like the visit cost him something. The first few times Julian was there while Ren cooked, the air in the kitchen felt tight. He'd sit at the table with his laptop, answering emails, occasionally glancing up when William said something particularly sharp to her. Once, William needled his son about working too much, and Julian snapped back harder than he probably meant to. Something about somebody needing to keep the company running so his father could keep living in this house. The silence afterward was long and uncomfortable. Wren kept her back to both of them, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring, until William finally muttered an apology and Julian muttered one back. Neither looked at the other while they said it. Wren didn't try to fix any of that. It wasn't her business. She just kept cooking, kept sitting at that table with William, kept noticing small things. The way William's hands shook more on cold mornings, the way he mentioned his late wife's name like it still surprised him to say it out loud, the way Julian's shoulders dropped half an inch the moment he stepped through the front door, like the suit finally stopped fitting so tight. One evening in November, she stayed late because William had a bad night, his chest tight, his breathing shallow enough that she called Julian instead of driving home. Julian arrived within the hour, hair uncombed, and found his father resting on the couch with Wren beside him, a damp towel on his forehead, calmly telling him a rambling story about a dog she'd had as a kid just to keep him talking and awake. "You didn't have to stay," Julian said afterward, standing in the kitchen while his father slept. "I know," Wren said. "I wanted to." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was recalculating something. "Most people who work for my father don't want to be here." "I'm not most people," she said, and went back to washing the pot she'd used for soup. He stayed for another hour that night, sitting across from her at the kitchen table while she finished cleaning up, not saying much, just watching her work in a way that made her self-conscious about the flowers still on her sleeve. Before he left, he asked if she wanted a ride home since it was raining. She said no, her van was fine, though the truth was the van's wipers barely worked anymore, and she drove home squinting through a smeared windshield the whole way. It wasn't dramatic what happened between them after that. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was small things stacking up over months. Julian starting to arrive earlier on weekends, staying for dinner instead of leaving right after. Him asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with cooking, like whether he should sell off part of the company his father built or keep pushing forward with something Wren barely understood. Her noticing he took his coffee the same bitter way his father did, black, no sugar, like neither of them believed they deserved anything sweeter. There were awkward silences, plenty of them. Once, in January, Wren burned an entire tray of cornbread because Julian had said something about her laugh reminding him of his mother's, and she'd forgotten the timer entirely. She'd been embarrassed, waved it off as tiredness, scraping the blackened bread into the trash while he stood there not quite knowing what to say. He hadn't pushed. He'd just quietly offered to run out and buy more cornmeal, and came back 20 minutes later soaked from the rain, holding a bag like it was something fragile. Money stayed a worry for her the whole time. Her van broke down in February, and she'd had to borrow $400 from her cousin to fix it, missing 2 days of work she couldn't afford to miss. Her brother still hadn't found steady work, and some nights she sat at her own kitchen table doing math on the back of a receipt, trying to figure out which bill could wait another week. She never mentioned any of it to William or Julian. It wasn't the kind of thing you brought into someone else's house, especially not a house like theirs. William was the one who noticed anyway. He asked her outright one afternoon why she'd shown up on foot, her sneakers soaked through from the walk. "Van's in the shop," she admitted. "It's fine. I'll manage." He didn't offer her money, which she appreciated more than she expected to. Instead, 2 days later, he mentioned that his mechanic owed him a favor and gave her the number. It wasn't charity. It felt more like being let into something. By spring, Julian had started coming on weekdays too, not just weekends. He'd sit at the table doing paperwork while Wren cooked, occasionally reading pieces of emails aloud to get her opinion, which she found strange at first, then oddly comfortable. There was a stretch of a few weeks in April where he barely came at all, buried under a deal at work, and William grew quiet and short-tempered in a way Wren hadn't seen before. She started staying later those weeks without being asked, and when Julian finally showed up again, pale and exhausted, William didn't scold him. He just told him to sit down and eat something, in a voice that sounded almost gentle. William noticed the shift between his son and Ren before either of them said anything out loud. He wasn't a subtle man. "You're going to marry that woman someday," he told his son bluntly one evening, loud enough for Ren to hear from the kitchen. "Don't wait until I'm dead to figure that out." Julian didn't deny it. He just looked embarrassed, and then he looked at Ren, and neither of them said anything for a while. There was one hard moment between them in May, when Julian offered to fix her van outright. No favors, no discount, just have it done. Ren refused, sharper than she meant to. She told him she wasn't some project he could solve with money, that she'd been taking care of herself long before she ever walked into his father's kitchen. He apologized, awkward and stiff, and admitted he didn't always know the difference between helping someone and trying to control the outcome. It was the most honest thing she'd heard him say. After that, he stopped offering to fix things for her and started just asking what she needed instead, which was smaller, but it mattered more. It took until early summer for Julian to actually say something real. He wasn't smooth about it. He stumbled through most of what he wanted to say, standing in the driveway while Ren loaded pans into her van. The maple tree's green now instead of orange. He talked about how he'd stopped dreading weekends at his father's house because she'd be there. He talked about how he didn't know what he was asking for. Exactly. Only that he didn't want her to stop coming. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him. "I never was." They didn't rush into anything after that. There was no sudden wedding, no fairy tale ending stitched together overnight. They dated slowly, carefully, the way two tired people do when they've both been disappointed before. There were still awkward dinners where Julian's business calls interrupted things, still nights Ren had to cancel because her brother needed help or the diner called her in for an extra shift. William got to watch all of it happen from his side of the kitchen table, which seemed to matter to him more than either of them realized at the time. He started leaving the door to that upstairs bedroom open sometime that summer, and Ren never asked why, though she guessed it had been Margaret's sewing room once, sealed shut out of grief until it wasn't anymore. He passed away the following winter, peacefully, in his sleep, with a stack of Ren's recipe cards still sitting on his nightstand, one of them half covered in his own handwritten notes correcting her seasoning. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. Julian kept the house. Ren still cooks in that kitchen most days, though now it's for the two of them, and sometimes for a small catering job on the side that's grown bigger than she ever expected it to. Enough that she finally sold the old van for a newer one that doesn't rattle on the highway. She still keeps William's photo on the mantle, dusted now, cleaned every week without fail, right next to Margaret's. Comment, kindness still exists, if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. Nobody set out to fall in love in that house. Ren just kept showing up, kept cooking, kept sitting at a table with a lonely old man because it felt like the right thing to do. Somewhere in all that ordinary kindness, without either of them planning it, something quiet and real took root. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not a miracle, not a shock, just someone who keeps showing up.